You're listening to The Artist Athlete, episode 77. This podcast is dedicated to circus. It's a place for professionals in the industry to share their stories, viewpoints, and information, and a place for outsiders to get a sneak peek into this world. Hey, friends, fans, and enemies. I'm Shannon McKenna. I'm the host of the Artist Athlete podcast and the founder of theartistathlete.com. I want to do what I do at the top of every show, which is to give a big thank you to my Patreons. Y'all have really showed up in droves since Miss COVID-19 came in and took over the world, and I'm so thankful. For those of you who don't know, Patreon is a website in which people pledge small amounts of money every month to help their favorite artistic endeavors, and the Artist Athlete podcast runs solely off of the contributions of Patreons. So if you want to help out the podcast, you love what you're listening to, you can go to patreon.com/theartistathlete. You can give as little as $1, but people who are at the enemy tier, that means they give $30 or more a month, I will call them up and they will leave a special little message for everyone listening out there, which I will play right now. This week's episode comes from Miss Allie Cooper, who is in Santa Cruz, California. Here's what Allie has to say.
Hi everyone, this is Allie Cooper, owner and coach at the Radical Movement Factory in Santa Cruz, California. I love supporting the Artist Athlete podcast and the amazing community Shannon has created here. I teach rope and fabric and have a circus conditioning app available on iTunes called Circ Plus. Circ Plus is worth checking out if you're looking for home and studio conditioning workouts to complement your aerial training. You can follow me on Instagram at AllieCooper_, and if you find yourself in California, come say hi.
Thanks, Allie. If you want to be a Patreon, just like the amazing Allie Cooper, you can go to www.patreon.com/theartistathlete. Again, www.patreon.com/theartistathlete. Sign up today. I love saying it that way. It's just like, today. My guest today is S. Hodelmoser. S's pursuit of excellence in their disciplines has led them all over the world, seeking out coaching from internationally renowned Mongolian contortion coaches from San Francisco to Ulaanbaatar. S's duo contortion act was awarded the Prix Moulin Rouge at the 40th Festival Mondial du Cirque de Demain, the special prize of Gomel State Circus at the 6th International China Circus Festival, and a golden buzzer from France's Got Talent. Their latest work, Vacuum 2020, pushes the boundary of contemporary contortion. Their unique athleticism has brought disturbing, contorted characters to life on commercials, TV, and film productions like It, Titans, and The Strain. S is a friend of mine, and I invited them on the podcast today, not only to talk about their experiences and career as a contortionist in the circus, but also to give a wider perspective of a representation of a non-binary artist making work and experiencing the world. I think we can learn a lot from having discussions from people who are different than us but love the same thing. And S is doing an awesome job of educating the world about what it means to live outside the gender binary. Here's my interview with S. Hodelmoser. You know what? They know that I don't know how to say their last name. Okay, so now I have to admit that I don't know how to say your last name properly.
Oh my God. You better be recording this already.
I am.
I'm just going to take a moment to savor this, that we've known each other for like a good year. And you've
I mean, I can
try.
try. Like, I can. I can guess.
No.
I'm guessing it's like Hodemoser.
Close. Hodelmoser.
Hodelmoser.
There's an easy way to remember this if you'd like. Hodelmoser is an Austrian last name, a rather niche Austrian last name, actually. It's from one very small part of the country in the Lake District. And it's easy to remember because yodeling is from Austria, and the first part of my last name rhymes with that, even though it's not spelled that way. So Hodel rhymes with yodel, and then it's Moser, which is quite easy on the mouth.
Hodelmoser.
Hodelmoser. Total
Right.
hoser, bulldozer, hold the mustard, model toaster, hodel monster. Heard it all. I will accept any and all of the above.
Awesome.
Yeah.
But most people just call you the glamour egg.
Yeah. Although I've recently seen myself being referred to as SWC online. I was like, the fuck is that? And then I was like, oh, it's Strange Wonderful Creature. Acronymed. I know. I'm like, SWC. It's so mysterious.
Holy crap, you got an acronym?
I have an acronym. I've been acronymed.
That's like, that's pretty sweet.
You would be Ta.
I know, I have a terrible acronym. TAA.
Not really. You sound very glamorous. What are you doing, S? Oh, I'm just doing an interview with Ta. Right? I sound elitist.
I guess. I feel like you just sound like you started to say a word and then had a grand mal seizure in the middle of it or something.
Or just my standard gap out. I've had a lot of brain injuries.
Awesome. Let's talk about it.
On that note.
S, welcome to the podcast.
Thanks. Happy to be here.
Hooray. So can you tell the people at home who you are and what you do?
Hello, good citizens. My name is S. I'm a trans non-binary circus artist. I've specialized largely in contortion, specifically Mongolian contortion. I've traveled all over the world pursuing my training there. My first coach was Sershma Biamba, and I've trained in Mongolia, and it's all been rather wonderful. I've performed all over the world in some festivals and competitions, and my work is largely focused around my interest in exploring the line between what is grotesque and what is beautiful. And that niche area of interest is usually informed from a disability studies perspective, which is what I happened to study in university, randomly enough, long before the thought of ever becoming a circus artist ever crossed my radar. Mostly because at that point in my life, I was a semi-professional Muay Thai fighter, and I thought that was what I was going to be doing with my life. Surprise! My recent dose of wonderful artistic weirdness was a project called Vacuum, which was funded by the Canada Council for the Arts, and it's over 300,000 views now on YouTube, which I'm very proud of. And most recently, outside of performing stuff, I've started an educational company with Jen Crane, aka Cirque Physio, where we get really nerdy about digging into the science behind flexibility. So we do crowdcast lectures like Spine Lab was our most recent one, which has gotten a lot of really lovely reviews.
Sweet.
Mixed bag. That's me.
Love it. What were you like as a little kid?
Ooh, I ate dirt. There's photographic evidence.
Okay, that tracks. I'm just wondering kind of like, because your art and your work and your output does very clearly have this line of like beautiful grotesque. And I'm wondering like where that stemmed from, or did you always kind of have an interest in weird stuff?
I think in weird stuff. I was thinking about this last night, just in terms of like
I was a totally normal kid, and then I grew up and decided to, I don't know, sculpt penises out of wax or something.
Encaustic penises. No. That's a tough one to answer. I was thinking about this last night, actually, more in relation to the kind of stories that we hear trans folks making sense of their life with. Because I was like, I know I felt the way that I felt from a very young age, but I was like, was I really? I loved my frilly 90s socks. I loved the dresses that my mom would make me, although they were shark print, of course. Yeah. Like my childhood was one that was filled with extreme niche interests. So like I was a dinosaur kid, not a Barbie kid, but I was the kind of kid who learned all of the Latin names for dinosaurs instead of, calling it a long neck or a sharp tooth, for those of you who have seen The Land Before Time out there. Hey. I'm pretty sure that most of the people in my family are somewhere happily on the autism spectrum. which makes it also difficult to make sense of if my life was normal or not. My siblings are all wicked smart. My mother is wicked smart. My grandpa's a rocket scientist, literally. Like, I don't know that I was into weird things. I certainly wasn't a sulky child. I was active and happy and outgoing. And my interest in weird things probably started. Fuck, that's a hard one to put a button on, Shannon. You'd have to ask my mother. I'm sure it was in there, but I can't think of becoming personally aware of it.
I guess there's never just one moment where you're like, all of a sudden like, I'm interested in weird things. But
I definitely started intellectualizing it in university. But
okay, cool. And you studied disability, what
disability studies. So disability studies is a really new field of academia. I mean, relative to everything else, it's kind of cropped up in the 80s and 90s from sociology. That would be its origin. And it's a really multidisciplinary field of study. So you get sociology, anthropology, you look at philosophy and law and morality and medicine. Where I went to school, which was the University of Toronto, it was housed beneath the Equity Studies program. So that program has things like women and gender studies, critical race studies, that sort of stuff. Okay. And my classmates used to call it the degree of isms: racism, post-colonialism, sexism, ableism, ageism. We studied isms.
What interested you in disability studies?
It was, honestly, it's down to one man. It was the scholar named Rod McCalco, who I'm still gratefully friends with to this day. I was up at a different university studying my fine arts degree for classical violin. A friend of mine who was already in the program downtown was like, hey, there's a free public lecture because it's Disability Studies Week, so we're hosting all these free events. You should come check out my favorite professor. And so I did. And I sat there listening to this man lecture for 60 minutes on very basic disability studies topics. And I just left that room with my mind completely blown because, like, I grew up listening to punk rock and I felt like I had just walked into a room where people were analyzing in an extremely intelligent way what it means to be normal and how we construct that. So normalcy as a construction and the fallout of that, socially speaking. I was like, fuck, this is stuff I've been thinking about my whole life. I didn't know that I could study it. It was, obviously life-changing for me. I literally went back to my dorm at the other university and started looking at how to transfer into this man's program.
Wow.
Yeah, here we are.
That's fascinating. It's interesting to me. I find that like the people I've met who grew up in super Christian households will do religious studies, or people who have found themselves in the minority will go into, studies about their race. It's interesting to me that what I know about you and your upbringing, that you didn't go into gender studies. You went into disability.
No, it literally never crossed my mind. And I think there's also a lot of disability studies is such a small field of study still that I think a lot of people think it's like you study one disability a week kind of thing, but that is far, far from what it is. It's, like I said, since it's stemming from sociology, it's a field of study where you're looking at the meaning and the nature and the consequences of disability. So you're looking at the difference between impairment, a temporary state that you may shift in and out of, and disability, which has a more permanent context. And it's also looking at the difference between what in that field of study they call the medical model and the social model. So locating your disability in the person, like this is a thing that's in your body and we can try to fix it and cure it, and it's a tragedy and something to overcome, and all that language that we're usually exposed to, versus a social construct of disability, which is more the focus of that field of study. And a social construct of disability acknowledges the impairment and injury or dysfunction in the person's body, but it looks at whatever suffering or difficulty may arise from that as coming externally from that person. So we live in an extremely ableist society. Things are very inaccessible on multiple levels, whether you're like a neurodiverse person and you're autistic and you think and speak differently, whether you move differently, think differently, like all this kind of stuff. That was a big tangent and didn't answer your question at all. So I'm half sorry. Mostly.
No, you don't even need to be half sorry. It doesn't matter what my question is. Your answer is more important. And I think actually, to me, you clarified a lot because I think the interesting thing about university or like getting a degree in anything is not so much what you study, but that you learn how to think about what you study.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Does that make sense?
Yes.
So, like, what I'm hearing from you is that you kind of learned all of these different ways to categorize and, like you said, like a study of isms, that you learned how to break down these constructs, whether they're socially or scientifically manifested. You learned how to break them down and study them.
Mm-hmm.
I see that a lot in your work, actually, even as you were producing Vacuum, you know, when you were creating on your Patreon. S has a Patreon, it's awesome. But going step by step and breaking down your process of how you created that work. I see parallels between that, actually, now that I am thinking about it.
Yeah, like I was a sensitive kid and I remain a sensitive adult. I'm definitely emotionally volatile, have a lot of different mental health issues, and definitely a sprinkling of autism, and that all kind of combines into a place where I have like a daily max in terms of being overstimulated or having a, I don't know, just a certain level of tolerance that seems a lot lower than other people a lot of the time. So looping back to that first question you had, like I didn't go into disability studies like as a bleeding heart, social justice kind of person, thinking, oh, poor disabled people, they need help. Like that was the farthest thing from my mind, because again, I was introduced to this field of study from such a unique entry point, aka like how the fuck do we decide what is a normal body, what's a normal way to move in the world, what's a normal, like, and that does tie into those other isms that you were talking about, Shannon. So whether we acknowledge this consciously or not, a normal way of moving in the world, a safe and acceptable way of moving in the world, is very often a white way of moving in the world, a straight way of being in the world. Like it goes beyond disability studies or ableism when you want to start looking at how we construct these things. That silently governs every part of our lives.
And I'm interested to hear about how this study or this work has impacted because my understanding is as you're doing all of this academic work, you're also doing Muay Thai. You're preparing, even though you may not know it at the time, to enter the circus world and stunt world and all of these other things. How has what you've taken in this course of study and your interests kind of worked in your professional life?
I'll start from the most recent and move backwards because I think that's ironically the most logical way to do it. Part of it's like if you want to actually come back to this idea of what a normal body is or a normal way of being in the world, the way that we construct this obviously leaves some bodies on the outside of this definition, or the margins is a word that's used often to describe something that is not normal. So if you're a marginalized body, we'll hear that discussion a lot in like race issues or critical race theory. So non-white bodies are almost always marginalized. In a disability studies context, if you are someone who is severely disabled from a social model of disability, socially, without even thinking about it, we have so much fear built up around disability because it's something we all implicitly understand as something we don't want to happen to us. We understand it as being tragic. We understand it as being a waste of human life. Like there's so many things that we've built up around the concept of a non-normal body that are really founded on a lot of ableist assumptions. But just to put that on a shelf for a second, if you have a normal body, that means you have bodies on the margins that are subnormal or supernormal, if you will. I mean, now we're looking at it as a spectrum, maybe instead of circles.
Super normal. Is that like?
Yeah. So I mean, like I'm going to use sub and super as the prefixes here. So not literally like a superhero, but this is where it gets really interesting for me in relation to my artistic work that I've been doing in recent years, because a subhuman body is a body that does not meet the basic minimum for what we would consider a normal way of being in the world. And it's a personhood and an existence that is extremely devalued and something that we are all really fearful of. A super normal body, or superhuman as opposed to subhuman, not in like Ubermensch way and not in like a Superman like Marvel Comics way, but super as in more than human. We have these bodies and we idolize them in our societies, and more often than not, they're the bodies of athletes who do more than we think a quote unquote normal body can do. And I'm super interested in this in relation to circus arts because that is quite literally the bread and butter of our work. We do the impossible. Our bodies complete tasks that to a quote unquote normal person seem utterly unattainable. It is an existence and an embodiment in your human form that goes beyond what we think is possible. So like the acrobatic body is not a quote unquote normal body, if you want to look at it from this particular sociological angle. The real irony here, and this is where it comes back to like my more aesthetic interest in like beautiful and grotesque, would be that in the course of living in a body that is superhuman, like an athlete or an acrobat, the nature of what you do, I mean, we all know it's not really like a mystery. You train to do that. There's definitely some genetics that might be helping you out in that capacity, but like it's not the 1800s where we don't understand how somebody is flying through the air on a trapeze. It's like we know that you can go to school or go train or do a course of study where you too can train your body to do these things. However, in the course of doing that, you are putting your physical body through so much strain that more often than not, you are likely pushing yourself towards a place of impairment or permanent disability far faster than a normal, quote unquote, human body. So the irony is that in existing in a superhuman state embodiment as an acrobat, as a professional athlete, you are very quickly going to find yourself backsliding probably to a subhuman state. You're not even going to stay in normal. How many professional athletes do we really know of or hear of after their peak professional career is over? You know, with the exception of people who make terrible personal life decisions. And then we hear about that in the news. It's like, we don't care about those people once they're no longer superhuman. But it goes beyond that. Like if you even want to look at football players, these guys are insane. They like sprint up and down the field and smash into each other like friggin' NASCARs. But it's no secret now that a lot of these men develop chronic traumatic encephalopathy where they're oh my God, I can't say it. They hit their head so many times that they completely scramble it and basically give themselves early onset dementia and are suicidal or are extremely violent towards their family or other people. And like most of these men end up killing themselves. They have slid all the way from a state that is super normal, more than normal as a professional athlete, all the way back from normal through to a state where their mental way of being in the world, their neurological way of functioning is subnormal and extremely painful. We don't hear about those people once they're gone. So to move away from this very depressing place I've taken this conversation to, even as a circus artist, we know that we can't do what we do forever. We know that we cannot function in the capacity that we function forever. For a lot of us, like if you're a Russian bar athlete, you're not going to be doing double twisting layouts when you're 58, I'm guessing. Although, of course, other apparatuses, we can modify the work that we do. But I am really interested in playing with those margins. What happens when I move my body in a way that convinces you it's moving in a way that is super normal or superhuman? What happens when I very quickly turn that on its head and I arrange my body in a way that appears subhuman? So the work I've been doing lately, just in terms of like writing, which hasn't made it onto my Patreon yet, I'm just in the drafting stages. As I said before, my personal focus right now has been contortion. And so I'm like, well, what is it about the contorted body that makes people so deeply uncomfortable? There's appreciation for it. If you're, a beautiful, graceful hand balancer who also can sit on their head, like, I'm not saying everyone who looks at contortion is grossed out by it, but that is such a big part of it for a lot of people. At the very least, it makes a lot of people uncomfortable or squirm a little bit. And it's like, you have a human body where all the parts are there, but visually they are now arranged in a way that is very unfamiliar and alien to you. And that's deeply unsettling to us because for a brief moment, you have taken a human body that is normal or even super normal and very quickly jumbled it into a place that is upsetting or concerning because it doesn't look right. And the trick with contortion is that you unwind that back into a body that makes sense to us visually as a viewer in the audience. That was a big old ramble, but there you go. There's a little bit of it.
I've never thought about contortion like that. I always think about the pose. I rarely think about the fact that like the resolution of the pose is to come back and remind us that it's a human body doing it.
Yeah, it's when the audience breathes again.
That's so cool. I kind of want to clarify because I'm not sure if I quite understand this interest in beautiful and grotesque and coming from super to sub normal and the assertion you made about circus long-term turning people into subnormal bodies.
Right. So not everyone who does circus is going to become injured in a way where their quality of life will quickly degrade past a point where like we don't view that body as moving normally or functioning normally. Hopefully I haven't indulged myself too deeply in my academic focus to turn people off here of what I'm saying. People aren't actually subhuman. People aren't actually superhuman. Like, it's just a theoretical way of kind of making sense of this big old soup of human existence, right? It's one lens to overlay on our experiences to try to understand it a little bit better. But back to your question.
I like it though. I like this idea of like having this like normal person as a point of reference.
It's just a bit dangerous because again, we're so deeply rooted in ableist ways of functioning in the world that, like, unless we wanted to have a disability studies lecture, I'm going to hazard a guess that most people are going to be like, think of subhuman or subnormal ways of being in the world as like a horrifying notion. And in disability studies, that's not necessarily the case. Like, that's kind of where I'm like, ooh, maybe I should have. I don't know how I could have clarified that better. The beautiful grotesque thing for me, again, it's probably started crystallizing as I began moving into my professional career with contortion performance, because I would get such mixed reviews from people being like, oh my God, that was beautiful. Like, I just loved every part of your act. And then other people being like, wow, what you did was amazing. But like, I was like looking through my fingers the whole time. And I'm like, wow, it's like a litmus test of the person watching in the audience. I feel like when you're looking at contortion, and a shape that is really beautiful can very quickly edge into the grotesque when you just take that flexibility a tiny bit farther. Or a really skilled contortionist knows that one angle presenting their body to the audience is going to look extreme compared to if the audience could see that shape from the back, right? Like, contortion is also an art of illusion.
I'm still on this kind of like super sub normal spectrum, and I have an idea, and I want to see what you think about this or bring it back around. So we talk about like a presentation of a super human or a super normal on stage, right? A person who's doing more than what a normal person can do.
They're doing the impossible. Yeah.
And you're also looking at like subnormal as kind of this idea of like almost edging toward, we could say, the beautiful and grotesque in a way, is what it sounds like.
The category of like subnormal or subhuman is not in and of itself where the line between beautiful and grotesque is found. For me, it's this entire ecosystem of subhuman, normal / human, and superhuman. It's not like it's just found in the subhuman category.
And right, but I think what I'm hearing in your work is that you're using your superhuman or super normal talents to appear subnormal in ways.
Yes.
And that interplay is what is beautiful and grotesque.
Contortion is a really wonderful opportunity to exploit that. Like, I don't think I've seen a silks act for me that walks the line between beautiful and grotesque. I don't think I've seen a tumbling act that walks the line between beautiful and grotesque. But I mean, every discipline in circus is going to bring a different possibility for visual metaphor, for meaning making, like all this kind of stuff. So contortion, people also say contortion's boring, right? Like, even at Cirque du Domaine, people were like, oh, like, I really hate contortion acts because they're so boring, but I don't know what the fuck that was. It was kind of cool. Because the act that we brought to Cirque du Domaine was, to my understanding, very different from what had been presented there before, and thus was extremely polarizing. People hated it or they loved it. But we were playing with, I think, in the initial iteration, we did have moments in our choreography where we stood up, but when we developed it over the course of the year and we're performing it in China, the entire act, we never stood up once. So you never saw our bodies rearranged into an organization that appeared like a normal human body. And it was like deeply disturbing to people because for 5 minutes, you're just like, when are they going to give us that break? When are they going to show us that it's okay or that they're a human body? And it wasn't. We wanted to be creatures the entire time. So contortion has that potential for sure. And also, like, the line between beautiful and grotesque is also a transient thing, similarly to that like overarching idea of normalcy that we open this with. Because when I talk about subhuman, every single one of us has experienced this briefly in our lives, whether or not you're an acrobat. So like if you've been really sick and laid up in bed and not able to do anything, you're experiencing a state of impairment. Impairment can be extreme or mild. It can be fleeting or extended. You know, we don't call it disability until it has a sense of permanency in someone's life or body. If you've broken any bones, you've been impaired. You've experienced very briefly what it is like to have to function in the world in a way that is not exactly normal. It's the fact that it's always moving and always in transition that's fascinating to me. And that also comes back to personal identity things for me as well.
What circus does best is this interplay between normal, supernormal, and subnormal. However, I think a lot of times circus resolves itself with that play by being very normative in other identifying aspects,
Yes.
such as gender.
Yep. And race. Although there's definitely a lot of other socioeconomic factors.
I would like to keep the conversation a little bit more about gender, just because I'm really aware that we're both two white people.
Yes.
And I don't really like to speak for other experiences.
No, although I was thinking about that before
point.
The podcast even. Because I was like, okay, we're going to be talking about gender. We're going to be talking about... It's just even being on the podcast, like as we are focusing on subject matter today, it's like I'm already in the position of the most privileged if you want to talk about trans identity, which is supposed to be a marginalized identity, right? Like it's already a niche kind of gender expression, although people are becoming more aware of it in the West contemporary culture. But the kind of transness I embody or that makes sense to me is one that is still really privileged. One, I'm white. Two, I'm assigned female at birth. Like you can obviously hear my voice is quite high. Hormones have never been a part of my idealized gender expression, although for me, surgery was top surgery. But even then, it's like if I really love wearing makeup, as we have talked about on many occasions. And like from a gender perspective, this is really confusing for a lot of people because they're like, well, if you're going to cut your boobs off and have top surgery and you say you're trans, your voice is still really high and you wear full faces of makeup and you like heels, and I just don't get it. And that we can come back to that in a second. But the point is that I can still pass very easily as a cisgendered woman, which is not how I feel at all. But the privilege that comes from that is that I can go to the grocery store, or I can go to another country or to another city, and I'm not going to worry about someone being violent towards me because I don't look right. Or like I have a lot of privilege where I'm coming from, and that also gives me a lot of leeway to explore my gender in the way that I want to explore it, which is one that is really fluid and one that I don't personally see as resolving. Like concluding maybe is a better word in a certain kind of expression or something else. So like non-binary is this big old catch-all term that includes fucking, oh my God, everything, gender queer, gender fluid, like anything that isn't just like a trans male or trans female, trans man or trans woman, pardon me. It's like you can have this wonderful rainbow patch in the middle of that spectrum of whatever expression you want. But growing up, I did not ever see any examples of people who were, one, embodying anything in the middle, anything androgynous, anything gender something. And two, like I didn't even see trans men like until I think I was 20 the first time I like came across that on the internet. And of course it makes sense that there would be trans men if there are trans women. But in my like early childhood, like skulking around on the internet trying to find breadcrumbs that explained all the weird shit I was feeling and thinking about, I only ever came across transgendered women. And that is like a particular kind of gender expression where there, for a lot of people, is an end point. Whether that includes surgery or hormones, you are transitioning in your gender with a goal in mind, like how you see yourself. And for me, it's the process of transition that is the place that feels most comfortable. So I fully expect my gender to fluctuate and change over the course of my life. I don't think, broadly speaking, socially, we're at a point yet where that is fine. You know, like a lot of people still aren't.
And how does that come across as in your work as a circus artist?
I mean, it's layered in there with my normalcy obsession for sure. Because now you can
Mhm.
talk about what is a normal kind of gender expression. You can even talk about what's a normal kind of transgender expression. I just don't think it
Mm.
exists. Normalcy is a construct. It's bullshit. So
Right. I think that's true, but I also think if we say that normalcy is a construct and or if we dismiss it as bullshit, then any other thing we use relative to that construct also has to be dismissed.
I
Um,
think you can call something bullshit without dismissing it. Like I can call bullshit
okay.
on something you say without dismissing it, right?
Maybe. I don't know. Calling bullshit sounds very dismissive to me.
Huh. Okay. To me, it's an entry point to a conversation.
Ah,
But
okay. So normalcy is bullshit. I'm here for it. I'll take
um,
it.
shit, I had my connecting point for you, and it's fluttering
Oh, I'm
away.
the worst. And then I interrupted you.
No. We were talking about it in relation to the art that I make. Okay. So I'm not, again, with the privilege that I do have. I'm white. I am tall. I am slender. I have a conventionally attractive face by female standards. All of these things add up in my favor if I
Your
want.
skin is on point.
Thank you. I have no
Let's
pores.
remember this.
I
Yeah.
buffed them all off. All of these things are heavily in my favor if I wanted to pursue like a mainstream corporate contract, right?
Yeah.
That's not really ever been the kind of work that I've been interested in. Like I was not, again, I didn't start circus as a kid. I started circus in my mid-20s. After now I've lost my train of thought again.
So you said you could you could very easily, because of the way you present in the world, you
Oh,
could very easily kind of adhere to those gender norms in circus.
I could. I just haven't really been very good at wanting that. So, like the work that really interests me and the work that lights me up and makes me excited to move my body or go watch someone else move their body is work that looks at the body in transition, in liminal states, in between places. And whether that's on the subject of beauty, whether that's on the subject of movement quality, whether that's the subject of like, how do I appear to you as a performer on stage? Do you read me as male? Do you read me as female? Are you just very confused about the entire thing? Like that is always in my work. And it's something that's like a playful thing for me. Like I get to constantly approach and reapproach where I am and also how that changes based on the audience viewing me, because we don't do circus in a vacuum.
Well, you actually do.
I
But
do. Oh, that's funny. Good job, Shannon. We like, again, if we wanted to get really into it, I got this textbook on contemporary circus, and it's really fascinating. Critical circus theory is a thing. Did not know. And it touches on disability studies, which is extra interesting to me, but I'm getting off topic. Come on, brain, you can do it.
yeah, gender expression. I guess
Oh, in a vacuum.
what I'm getting is it's very, very brave what you and the way that you're presenting in the world, because I think I do know people who are um, either, I mean, there are plenty of, circus, I always joke it's like the gayest show on earth. Like it's so gay, and yet there are these kind of like gender roles and models that are always written in and kind of taken as just like obvious truths.
Yeah.
And despite people's personal lives, they adhere to those on stage. Whereas as an artist, you have very consciously and on very large stages in the world, I mean, Demain is not a small festival,
No.
chosen to tackle these topics.
I mean, thank you.
It's very commendable.
I don't think it's particularly brave. That's just me. And again, that circles back to privilege is the first thing. And that is that it's not.
But has there ever been any fear, like that you'll get any blowback, and have you experienced blowback?
Yes, but like not. This was more like in like the film part of my life. So like I funded my early circus career by doing really inadvisable, by doing stunt work in the film industry professionally. And obviously everything's on hold right now because of COVID. So I can't say that I do stunts right now, but stunts is extremely lucrative, potentially. It's also extremely dangerous, potentially. And I rolled the dice many times in my early years in order to like pay for my circus training and like flying to San Francisco to train with Searchma or stuff like that. Like that was my payoff. That is a kind of risk But again, there's still privilege and luck rolled in with that one, because in the same way that I'm appealing to a corporate client, I'm appealing for film. We like looking at certain faces and we like looking at certain bodies. And in stunts, I'm a niche stunt performer. I'm bald. I can do weird movements. There are very, very few tall stunt women, at least in Canada. And I do say stunt woman because I double females generally. I've had a few really wonderful opportunities to play non-binary characters, like in Code 8, actually. That blew up like on Apple TV or Netflix or something a couple of weeks ago because everyone's in quarantine and running out of shit to watch. Code 8 was a really awesome movie. It's a superhero movie, but the writers actually wrote in a non-binary character, which was so cool. Like in the script, it was using neutral pronouns. On set, the crew was referring to me like as the character in neutral pronouns. And that's something that I just don't experience otherwise. Like I go to work to do the stunt, to make sure the stunt coordinator looks good, to make sure that I'm safe, to make sure the shot gets done. I'm not about to start a conversation on set about my pronouns or who I actually am. It's like, I don't fucking matter on set as a stunt person. I do my job and I try to do it well, and that is my responsibility first and foremost. However, if I'm being called in to double, it's usually because there is a tall, slender actress. And I would not feel comfortable. Like I was so in the closet about so much of my own gender expression stuff, like even to myself, like in part, ironically, because of the way that I was making money to do circus. The film industry is really liberal and overall extremely welcoming. It's also pretty gay. But unfortunately, I ran into quite a few people in positions of power early on in my stunt career who felt quite comfortable expressing really violent transphobic sentiments. And I was like, well, fuck. I was just kind of barely starting to acknowledge that I needed to figure some things out. And I was like, this is not a place to do that ever. I will be here and I will be quiet and demure and all the ironic, sexist female things you would like to imagine that I embody. So you will hire me again. The end. Like, in being able to start to make the kind of weird art that I like to make in circus and having the really lucky and amazing opportunities I've had for performing in the last few years, it's made it possible to indulge in my gender expression more and to do it more publicly. I've really taken like very small baby steps that have added up to the place that I'm in now. So even with Cirque du Domaine, I wasn't talking about gender identity things. I certainly wasn't talking about whether I wanted top surgery or not. Like I was on my Instagram, things are very groomed, shall we say. And only very recently have I started speaking about this publicly, partly because being in the place of privilege that I am, if I have the spoons for it, I feel very strongly that it is my responsibility to try to have conversations with people that don't understand this shit as well. Because other people who don't have the privilege that I have are probably using their spoons up on other shit. Do you know what I mean? And even with Cirque du Domaine,
and by spoons you mean kind of like mental energy.
Yeah, there's that's referring back to oh gosh, who wrote this essay? It relates to chronic pain and disability, actually. Let me see. The spoon.
Yeah, it's okay. It's not. I don't want to get us too off topic with it. I just wanted to clarify that for the audience because it's kind of, I like it as
for your notes. It is by Christine
metaphor.
Miserandino. It is a 2003 essay called The Spoon Theory, and it is wonderful, and you should all read it.
I will put it in the show notes.
Okay, but cycling back to what you were saying, I'm sorry, Shannon, I'm being really long-winded.
That's all right. My job is to just let you talk.
Even with Cirque du Domaine, like my performance partner at the time, Troy, he and I met on a film set. We were working on The Strain, which was like a vampire show by Guillermo del Toro. And we were both being weird little creatures. But on that stage, it's like we wanted to present non-human performing bodies to people. But like it feels much safer to be a creature than it does to be a human that doesn't fit. Does that make sense? Even then, yes, this stuff has always informed my work, but I've been like, I've had to build up my own like courage in expressing that either very blatantly or just exploring that privately. How the audience gets to interpret what they see publicly. So like with Cirque du Domaine, we're creatures in the original costumes that we had. Like we really wanted people in Paris not to be able to know which performer was which. I underestimated, I think, where aesthetic interests are at in France at the moment. And this echoed again later in the year a lot. Like we had a few performing opportunities in France last year, and people really love seeing a black body and a white body on stage. Really like it.
Mhm.
They don't want it covered up, which is fine.
But
It
did
just
you
wasn't
want
our
to cover it up
artistic.
as a gotcha? I see what you're saying now.
Like I
I see.
didn't want like that becomes the focus of the piece. It's a black body and a white body. And it's like, yeah, it's just facile to me. It's like that's not the conversation we're trying to have.
Yeah, so I think what I'm trying to understand is your desire in this was to present a body in its subnormal, normal, and supernormal states, independent of gender or race or all of these other social constructs we put upon bodies. The audience very much wanted the guidelines of gender and race.
Exactly. It makes it much easier to consume.
Aha.
Like we're both bald. There was that. But like even in I was shocked because like long story short, we weren't allowed to use the first costumes that we planned on wearing for this act. We were scrambling to try to figure out what we were going to wear for the first judged performance. We had 2 hours to figure it out. And I was like, we're supposed to match. I'm like, can I be topless at least? Because first of all, I'm upside down and I'm in a big back bend pretty much the whole act. So gravity isn't even going to give you the hint that I might have any breasts at that point in my life. But they were like, no, absolutely not. You cannot be topless on French television. And I'm like, what is France?
What?
they were like, no, absolutely not. You have to wear a top. And I'm like, okay. And it was an interesting interaction even from the beginning with Cirque du Men because, there's a lot of stuff in the lead up. They want your artist bios and there's written material to produce and people interview you. And with the exception of Kim Zin, sorry, Kim, if you're listening, I feel like I just butchered your last name. Kim, like they did an interview and they wanted to talk about gender expression because I was trying to be vocal about being a non-binary artist at the festival. I'm sure there's been trans or non-binary or gender variant people there before. It's just not a conversation I had come across in media that is available on Cirque du Men. And I'm like, this seems really important. This is a cool thing to talk about. And French is a very conservative language, linguistically speaking. They're very reluctant to allow new words in. It's not like the English language where we're like, hashtag is a word now that means something different. We're always adding words to the Oxford English Dictionary, but France is not like that, linguistically speaking. And so they don't have the kind of linguistic fluidity that in English we've started to try to accept, at least they and them, as an acceptable singular pronoun for a human being. Or like in, what's the example everyone always uses? Sweden, I think, has like the 3 pronouns now, and they use the neutral one in all their government documents. I was trying to have this conversation with people over email before we went to that festival, and they were kind of like, yeah, we'll do our best. I don't know. They didn't want to have that conversation. Nobody wanted to have that conversation. And that's fine. We went there, we performed a piece that we were really proud of artistically and aesthetically speaking. There wasn't space for that conversation in so many ways. Do you know what I mean?
Yes. It's a conversation that feels like it needs a lot of space because of what it does to this kind of construction of normal. This bullshit construction, your words, of normal. And so the education required takes time.
Potentially. I mean, like, I could also just extrapolate this back to the film example I mentioned earlier, which is like, is this the place to have this conversation? And I don't mean like, is this a place to have the conversation as is it appropriate or not? Is this the place I will be best heard? It takes energy and it takes emotion and it takes like time to have these conversations with people. If you're going to do it at a Trump rally, that's not going to go over as well as if maybe you're speaking to somebody one-on-one. Or when I say that Cirque du Men wasn't the place to have that conversation, or that film isn't the place to have that conversation, I'm not trying to be critical or saying that they're closed off to this at all, because they're not. It's just like, is this the most effective way to talk about these things, is maybe a better way to say that.
Do you find that you use your art to have these conversations? Because it sounds like to me that when you're describing these interfaces or these things, it's like it's through email, or it's how you're presented in the brochure, or it's how you're interviewed. And it makes me think of this artist I really admire who talks about how there's kind of a scale of reality from like 1 to 10.
Okay.
And it's like the closer you get to your own reality is like in one. And then those who operate entirely in metaphor, like a Jackson Pollock or someone
Okay.
is still relaying their experience through the world as an artist, but they're at like a 10, right? They're so far from reality, or like what we know is like the tangible, recognizable reality, that it's just paint on a canvas.
Mm-hmm.
Do you find that the conversations you're talking about that are very academic, do you also find that in your work, or do you find that you're more going in different directions?
No, that's the work that informs the work. I don't have those conversations public. I don't think I've ever had this conversation publicly. I've talked about it with a few other circus artists for sure.
So what do you mean the work that informs the work?
It's like if you're going to do a piece that is not just about, in Toronto, we'll call it a tits and splits act. So a corporate act where like there's no emotional content to it. You're just making beautiful shapes. You're entertaining the masses. It's like the work that goes into that is technical work. You're working on your ability to perform a certain level of trick. You're polishing your transitions, your musicality, your expression. The work that I've always been interested in making has layers of meaning so that you can approach it and interact with it from different places. So, for example, vacuum is probably a really wonderful example here. I'm in this tower, this like prism of latex that is slowly suctioning around me. The air is sucked out of the volume and it just literally fixes me in place like a bug in amber. And then air is reintroduced to the volume and it slowly re-expands. And as air is reintroduced into the volume, you start to lose the edges of my shape because the latex isn't completely transparent. Being in the latex, it is very difficult to determine if it is a female or male body that you are watching. From a very superficial view, it's going to be something you've never seen before. If you want to make a circus act that's marketable, but you don't want to go full corporate, you need to do something that people haven't seen before and that catches your attention and keeps it. That's part of the game. You can make really self-indulgent art that is going to be viewed by two people and as a 20-minute durational piece where you get up on a strap and you do 9 one-arm dislocates and then come down and stare at the audience for the last 10 minutes. And that absolutely means something. And I love that kind of art, but it's not going to get booked at a German cabaret or for a festival or competition, right? For me, it's important to try to start this conversation with as many people as possible. So if somebody sees my vacuum piece and they're interested in it just on a purely visual basis, then I've already got like a toe in the door to have you start thinking about other stuff. If you find my Patreon and you're reading the blogs that I wrote or watching the vlogs, which are public, by the way, folks, you don't have to pay me money to look at those, thanks to the Canada Council, you're going to start to see the thought process that went into creating that act. And also just, if I catch your attention for long enough, or if you get to have a conversation with me or someone else who has started thinking about it, you're going to be like, wait a minute, was that a male performer? Was that a female performer? Is this supposed to be sideshow? Is it supposed to be freak show? Is it supposed to be beautiful? Am I supposed to be terrified? Like, it's all going to be different depending on where you as the audience member approach that act from. It is not widely palatable. It's not an act you're going to walk away from going, wow, that was just beautiful. It's such a mixed bag of reviews, which I really like. Because then if I catch you, I get to talk to you about things like, well, was it beautiful or was it grotesque? Well, were you watching a male performer or a female performer? Well, were you watching circus or were you watching a stunt?
What advice would you give to yourself at the beginning of your career?
I didn't prepare for this, Shannon.
No one prepares for this.
No one prepares for this moment. What advice would I give to myself at the beginning of my career? Well, that's a funny question, Shannon, actually, because it's like, what was the beginning of my career? Was it as an artist?
Oh, yeah, you're allowed to define that wherever you want. Trust me, everybody has tried to ask every single loophole to get out of answering this question.
No. I think it's a wonderful question, and I absolutely don't want to get out of it, but I'm not sure I can give you a quick answer.
No, it doesn't have to be quick.
Okay, let me give you two. The first one I'll take in the literal sense, which is as a circus artist, the beginning of my circus career. If I was going to give myself advice at the beginning of my circus career, it would probably be, one, to be a little bit more patient, because I've always been in a rush my entire life. And it actually doesn't usually get you where you want to go faster. More often than not, it kind of slows you down. Accidents happen. You make mistakes. It's better to go a bit more slowly and methodically. I think I would have told myself to start indulging in my weirder art sooner. And, well, shit, Shannon, you know what? I actually think it's all kind of gone quite all right. I didn't wait a super long time until I felt like I had quote unquote earned my right to perform. I didn't do $50 or performing for a meal kind of, poor artistic form corporate work. Like, I did my first corporate gig when my technical abilities were at a high enough level that I fairly earned the rate that was the standard set in Toronto at the time. Like, I didn't undercut anybody just to get on stage experience, but it was important for me to start performing early. I have a great stage presence, and that didn't just happen out of nowhere. Like, I wasn't a theater kid who practiced drama and shit. It's like I worked on that. That was a skill that I had to work on at the same time that I kept building my technical skills. Especially with contortion, it often becomes this game of who is the most flexible, and only the most flexible person deserves to perform. So I've heard a lot in my career, they're like, well, why did you get that? Why did you get to go to Cirque du Domaine? And like, it's all fucking luck. A lot of it is luck, which is not what anybody wants to hear. And that's a longer conversation as well, because you can make your own luck a little bit. But being the best technically doesn't earn you the right to make art, is what I would say to myself at the beginning of my career. Being the best technically does not give you the right to make art. You have a right to make art whenever you damn well feel like it.
Yes.
And making that art is probably actually going to boost your technical abilities in the process. And you're not going to be paying attention to the fact like, oh shit, I can hold my contortion handstand for 60 seconds now because I've been like trying to create this weird movement or move my toes a certain way in a handstand. And I've been drilling that for a week. And it's like, oh, well, actually my endurance has improved along the way. Like, it feels like a much more humane and sane way of trying to increase the capacity of your physical body while working towards something that is usually the ultimate application of circus arts. You want to perform for somebody. If I was going to be an asshole and take a super wide lens on your question, what would I say to myself at the beginning of my career? The beginning of my career was as a musician. Like, I was a band geek. I played 7 different instruments. My musical career was interrupted by that Muay Thai career I referenced very briefly at the beginning of this conversation. I hadn't been an athletic kid. I was too busy playing a billion instruments. And I, at the end of my university career, probably due to some post-concussion syndrome that went unacknowledged, as well as some abusive situation dynamics, I had like a complete psychotic break and ended up on a locked ward for a very long time. And it was an extremely unpleasant experience that also still informs my work today. I wouldn't go quite so far as to use the verbiage of like psychiatric survivors, which is some of the language used around those experiences, but it's something that I still not struggle with, but like I still puzzle about, because I'm like, that was a terrible experience to be an adult where your autonomy is removed from you. Like, you cannot leave. Mm-hmm. People will inject you with drugs whether you want them or not. Mm-hmm. It's a really scary place to be, but at the same time, I don't think that I would be here if someone had not forcibly brought me there. Mm. So that's its own thing. When I finally got out of that hospital, I was walking through Kensington Market and happened upon a place called Krudar Muay Thai. And I literally was like, I don't know what to do. I mean, I didn't manage to kill myself, and this was a really weird experience, and my life is completely upside down, and I don't know what I'm doing. I guess I'll just go punch some stuff. Mm. And I did a class, and it felt really good. And so I went back the next day, and I did it again, and that felt good. So I went back the next day, and I did it again. And it was a way that I was able to begin emotionally regulating myself and avoid having like dissociative blackouts, which had been the issue that brought me into the psychiatric system in the first place. I loved Muay Thai so much, and it was the first thing that had worked for managing my mental health, that I just became completely obsessed. And before I knew it, someone was like, why are you here all the time? Are you going to fight? And I was like, I don't know. I never thought about it. And it turned into a rather successful early fighting career anyways. I lost my first fight. And then I won everything after that. I won a North American Championship belt. I was like, I'm really good at this. I think I'll go to Thailand. I'll go pro. That was my life path. Like, there was no art that was coming beyond like martial art. And I was getting ready for a semi-pro fight. And long story short, I ended up getting knocked out in sparring like 10 times in a row. But the normal people who supervised weren't there. And so nobody was like, oh, like S really hit their head hard on the boards, like they're out, like go put them on the bench. It was like, just get up and keep going, because you're also trained to just get up and keep going. you don't show any pain and you don't show injury. And that for me ended up biting me in the ass really badly, because 3 days later, my brain completely swelled and was bleeding, and I ended up in the hospital. And a few days after that, I very suddenly lost my ability to read, and I couldn't speak anymore. And it was the beginning of about a year with a lot of time in bed, a lot of wearing sunglasses. I was super photosensitive, walking around with sound canceling headphones. I couldn't even handle two people speaking in a quiet voice at the same time. It just ceased to sound like English to me. And it was this really long walk back to any kind of low level physical ability. Like after a year and a half, when I was cleared by like my neurospecialist to finally start doing stuff again, my old sparring partner, Jana Hein, took me to a circus class, which I hated. But I had gone from being an athlete who trained like 40 hours a week to being someone who was completely impaired or disabled, if you will, in a way that was absolutely non-visible to anybody else around me. And that was a really isolating experience, and one that was and is still extremely difficult to put into words. What was the word that I was obsessed with? It starts with an E. Ineffable experiences. Even that ties into things about beautiful and grotesque and what's normal, because how do you communicate the human experience to somebody else when there's no words to do it? It's why art is so satisfying to so many of us, because your interpretation is stuck in your head. But anyways, I stuck with circus initially for a stubborn lack of any other idea. Ironically, it was a silks class, so it was the first class, and I had no grip strength, so it was extremely disappointing. And then I actually ran into straps, and I was like, this is really great. And then I think I saw a photo of a contortionist for the first time, like a year into basic circus training. It actually was a photo of Searchma when she was really young. If we wanted to go full circle here, it was super weird. She was doing a triple fold. I never had been taken to a circus show. I had never seen a Cirque du Soleil show on TV. Like, I had zero circus exposure. And I just thought this was the most magical thing I had ever seen a body do. And I was like, I want to do that. And my coach at the time, now I realize they were being like kind of sarcastic, because I went to them and I'm like, how do I do this? I want to do this. And I'm like a 24-year-old stiff as a board ex-boxer with my shoulders all curled in and no splits. And they're like, start with your bridges. And I did. And I kept going very small piece by very small piece. So if you really wanted to take the big picture on this of like, what would I tell myself at the beginning of my career, is it would probably just to tell myself to keep going, because it has taken so many right angle turns that I could never predict being where I'm at today. And it's still changing in a way that is really wonderful, and thankfully much better emotionally regulated with 99.9% less dissociative blackout episodes. And life is good and the art is better. So there's your short answer and your long answer.
I'm very appreciative for both. Thank you so much for coming on the podcast today.
My pleasure. This was a lovely conversation.
That was my interview with S. Hodelmoser. Thank you for coming on, S. One of the reasons that I really strive for, and admittedly fall short of, but I'm always working with my amazing assistant Hannah, who books all my guests. Something we really work to do is get a diverse spectrum of people within the industry. And I'm not just talking about people from various disciplines and varying job titles, but also to have diversity in race, in gender identity. I've even addressed income diversity on this show. And it's important to me that the Artist Athlete podcast strive to do this because of this concept of representation. Marian Wright Edelman, who is a children's rights activist, is attributed to have once said, "You can't be what you can't see." We are all searching for models of the types of lives we want to live. That's why a lot of you listen to this podcast, to hear voices from people who are in a position that you hope to one day be in, or to hear stories of lives that are the types of lives you want to live, and so you can see yourself in these people. And if we don't find these models, if the lives that people are living, if those people aren't like us in some way, it's very hard to relate to them. And we may not think it's possible for us to do those same things. In this interview, S talks about how they scoured the internet for people who looked or felt or represented in gender the way they did. And that's why it takes so much bravery to be a pioneer. Because you have to be without seeing. You have to walk blindly and trust your gut, trust your instincts, and feel safe enough to do so. Another really important factor that S points out in this interview is that they don't believe they could have, or they could still be, I'm saying this in the past tense as if S isn't still online doing their thing all the time, but S couldn't represent the way they do if it weren't for the privilege they have in other areas. There's this recognition in the interview that because S was raised in a suburb, the color of their skin, S is white, they have a college education, the way they quote unquote pass or look more female, the way they're attractive. All of these things contribute to their ability to explore gender and their artistry in a relatively safe way, where other non-binary or trans people may not have the same amount of freedom or safety. And I think privilege is something that's really important to kind of wrap your head around right now. I think that there is this understanding with privilege sometimes can come a lot of shame or guilt or denial of your privilege if you are a person who has a certain advantage, not because of anything you did, but just because of the way you were born or the opportunities that were presented to you. I'm sorry, I'm recording this on June 10th, and I am aware that it's going to go out on Monday, but I have no idea what the world's going to look like in the next 5 days. So I'm trying to choose my words carefully. But I want to say that it's okay to have privilege. I mean, it has to be because it exists whether it's okay or not. If you retreat or if you back away from the fact that you have it, that's when things become not okay. Because if you deny the existence of your privilege, then you can't see how it may affect other people who don't have that privilege. And I think the broader thing I want to say, going back to this idea, you can't be what you can't see. And if you can't see how you can make a contribution to helping people who aren't born with the same privileges that you are, then you can't be a person who helps those people. You can't be a part of the change that, yes, may take away some of your privilege, but may actually lead to the kind of world where we are all represented the way that we want to be and live the lives and have the models that live the lives that make us the most free and the most able to express ourselves artistically. And I want to use my privilege as a white woman who was college educated and had the safety and the money and the platform to create a podcast that people listen to say that Black Lives Matter. And this podcast will always be a place for every circus artist, every person, everyone in this industry. I don't do it perfectly all the time, but I am always trying to make this podcast, this platform, an inclusive one for everyone. If you want to let me know ways that I'm falling short of it, I am always listening. I see my job on this podcast is just to ask a question and hand the mic over and listen. So if you want to be heard, get at me. If you want to hear more from S. Hodelmoser, they are all over the internet. Strange Wonderful Creature is their moniker. StrangeWonderfulCreature.com. On Instagram, Strange Wonderful Creature. You want to go on TikTok, Generation Z? They're on there too. Strange Wonderful Creature. And as for me, as always, for aerial training tips and inspiration, I'm on Instagram at @the_artist_athlete. My website is theartistathlete.com. I'm on Facebook. I'm also on TikTok, but you don't have to follow me on TikTok. And hey, if you love what you're listening to, you want to support the podcast, patreon.com/theartistathlete. That's it. If you don't have the monies right now, I get it. You're a baller on a budget. Do subscribe, rate, and review the podcast. It really helps us out, and you will get episodes directly into your inbox, including next week's episode on Monday with the fabulous, the one and only Gypsy Snyder will be joining me. I can't wait for that. Talk at you next week, friends, fans, and enemies. The Artist Athlete podcast is supported solely by donations from people like you. Here's what some of those people have to say.
Hi everyone, this is Allie Cooper, owner and coach at the Radical Movement Factory in Santa Cruz, California. I love supporting the Artist Athlete podcast and the amazing community Shannon has created here. I teach rope and fabric and have a circus conditioning app available on iTunes called Circ Plus. You can follow me on Instagram at AllieCooper_, and if you find yourself in California, come say hi.
Hi, I'm Leah. I hate conditioning. So I created the ABCs of Fitness, a fun, full program of active flexibility, body weight, and cardio with personal daily check-ins to motivate you wherever you are and whatever discipline you do. Join our next 19-day check-in challenge and slide into my DMs on Instagram at ABCs of Fitness.
Aloha! My name is Beth Russell, and I live on the beautiful island of Maui, Hawaii. I am an aerial artist and movement instructor specializing in chakra yoga to keep me balanced and grounded. I play with silks, trapeze, lyra, rope, acro, aerial yoga and dance, slacklining, pole, bungee, and climbing. Really anything that goes up and allows me to explore 3D space. You can find my dedicated aerial page on Instagram at Maui Aerialist. If you find yourself coming to Maui, let's play.
Hey there, friends, fans, and enemies. This is Chris Alston, Patreon of the Artist Athlete podcast, straps artist and lyra performer and acrobat out of Greenville, South Carolina. So if you're ever passing through, make sure to stop in and see me and my friends. We have a wonderful space, and we'd love to see you.
Hi, my name is Erica Lee. I'm from St. Louis, Missouri, and I'm an aerialist. I teach performing arts to elementary school during the day and do pole and slings and ropes by night. I really, really like the Artist Athlete podcast because it gives me a lot of circus goals to look forward to. It gives me a lot of insight on what's going on around the world in circus, and that's why I'm on Patreon.
Hello all. Thank you for tuning in to the Artist Athlete podcast. I am Opal Schwartz from Minneapolis, Minnesota. If you're ever in the city, feel free to stop by the Aviary Minneapolis. It's a great time. With that, I hope you all have a wonderful rest of your week, and goodbye.
Hey there, artists and athletes. This is Andy Smith, owner and artistic director at Saltaire Circus School in Jacksonville Beach, Florida. And I want to thank you for contributing to the Artist Athlete podcast. If you ever find yourself down in Florida, come check us out. Whether you're an artist, athlete, or someone ordinary just looking to be extraordinary, we got a place for you.